My husband cheated with my sister, stole our inheritance, and ended up in jail. Then the unexpected happened. I never thought my life would turn into something out of a soap opera. But here we are. Let me give you the full story because this one is wild, and I honestly need advice or maybe just someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind for being this angry. Let's start from the beginning. My name's Katie, 34F. I met my now ex-husband Mark, 36M, in college. He was charming, the type of guy who could make friends with anyone, and he had this aura of confidence that I found intoxicating. He wasn't just good-looking, he was good at everything. Sports, academics, socializing. He walked into a room, and people noticed. We dated for 5 years before getting married, and for most of our relationship, everything seemed perfect. Of course, hindsight is 20/20. Looking back, I can see all the little red flags I missed. Mark was always too good at convincing people to do what he wanted, and he was always a bit too secretive. He'd tell me he had to work late or go out with the guys, and I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We were happy, or at least I thought we were. But things started to change a couple of years ago, right after my parents passed away. That's when my younger sister Lily, 28F, and I inherited their estate. It wasn't millions or anything, but it was enough to provide a comfortable safety net. I thought Lily and I were getting closer after our parents' deaths. We'd had a strained relationship growing up. She was always the rebellious one, running off with sketchy guys, dropping out of college, getting into trouble. I thought she'd changed, but clearly I was wrong. When our parents died, Mark was very involved in the inheritance process. At the time, I thought it was sweet that he wanted to help me with all the paperwork and financial decisions, but now I realize he was just laying the groundwork for what he would do next. Lily and I split the inheritance 50-50, and everything seemed fine at first. We both grieved, but Lily, as usual, leaned into her emotional side, acting like a lost child. And Mark, he was right there comforting her. He was always too eager to help her. At first, I chalked it up to him trying to support me by helping my family, but eventually the way they interacted made me feel off. I can't explain it. It wasn't anything overt, just small things, like the way they'd glance at each other or how they seemed to have private jokes. I'd be sitting right there, and it felt like I was the third wheel. Then there were the texts. I'd casually pick up Mark's phone to hand it to him, and I'd see my sister's name pop up. Innocent messages at first, "How's your day?" or "Can we talk later?" But they were frequent, too frequent. When I confronted him, he was so quick with his answer that it caught me off guard. "She's your sister, Katie," he'd say with this tone of mock innocence, his blue eyes locking onto mine. "She's going through a hard time. What do you want me to do? Ignore her?" I remember standing in the kitchen one evening after a particularly long day at work. Mark was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone while I chopped vegetables for dinner. "You've been texting Lily a lot," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Is everything okay with her?" He didn't even look up. "Yeah, just checking in. You know how she gets." That was the thing. I didn't know how she got. Lily was always in some emotional crisis, always needing someone to rescue her. And Mark had taken it upon himself to be that person. But why? The nagging feeling grew, and I started noticing other things. He'd come home later and later, always with an excuse about work running late or needing to meet with a client. He'd shower the moment he walked in the door, as if he were trying to wash something off. Still, I pushed those doubts aside. After all, I had no proof. I didn't want to believe that my husband, the man I'd been with for 10 years, could betray me like that. Not with my sister. The idea was too painful to even consider. But the truth came crashing down on me one night. I had been away on a work trip, a short one, just 3 days. I remember calling Mark to tell him I'd be coming home a day early. He sounded surprised, but not unhappy. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. I thought maybe he was out with friends or at the gym, but something felt wrong. The house had that stillness to it, like it was hiding a secret. I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, and that's when I heard the noises. Muffled voices, whispers, and then a giggle. I felt my stomach drop. My hand trembled as I turned the doorknob, hoping, praying that I was imagining things. But I wasn't. There, in our bed, Tangled in the sheets like they had no shame were Mark and Lily, my husband and my sister. Katie, Mark stammered, jumping up and scrambling to cover himself. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember screaming, throwing whatever was within reach. I broke a lamp. There was glass everywhere. Lily was crying, wrapped in a sheet like some helpless victim, as if she hadn't just destroyed my life. You're disgusting, I screamed at both of them. How could you? How could you do this to me? Mark tried to get closer, his hands raised in some pathetic attempt to calm me down. Katie, please, let me explain. Explain what? I spat, backing away from him. That you're a liar? That you've been sleeping with my sister while I've been working to keep this marriage together? Get out, both of you, now. Lily, sobbing, tried to speak. Katie, I didn't mean for this to happen. I don't want to hear it, I shouted. Get out of my house. They left that night, but the nightmare wasn't over. A few weeks later, while I was still reeling from the betrayal and moving forward with the divorce, I found out the worst part. Mark and Lily had been scheming behind my back. Mark had convinced her to hand over a portion of her inheritance to him. He told her he'd help her invest it, help her get back on her feet, and she, like an idiot, gave him the money. I was floored. Not only had they betrayed me emotionally, but now they had stolen from me, from our family. That money wasn't just Lily's to give away, it was our parents' legacy. Couldn't believe it. It was like losing them all over again. The court case that followed was brutal. Mark tried to claim that the money was a gift from Lily, but my lawyer wasn't having it. We proved that it was part of the inheritance, and the judge ruled in my favor. But the real kicker, Mark had tried to hide part of the money in an offshore account to avoid losing it in the settlement. That's when the police got involved. I'll never forget the day Mark was arrested. Watching him being led away in handcuffs, his smug face finally showing fear, was the closest thing to justice I'd felt throughout the whole ordeal. He was charged with fraud and theft, and now he's serving time. As for Lily, she's tried to reach out, but I blocked her on everything. She wrote me a letter, claiming she was manipulated by Mark, that she was lonely, confused, blah blah blah. But honestly, I don't care. She's dead to me now. I'm left picking up the pieces of my life, but I'm getting stronger every day. I still feel the weight of the betrayal, but I'm free. Free from their lies, their toxicity, and all the hurt they caused me. And if you're wondering, yes, I did get all the inheritance money back. But honestly, no amount of money can fix what they broke. Thanks for reading Reddit. I'm not sure where I go from here, but at least I know one thing. I'm never letting people like that into my life again. Part 2, what a surprise. After Mark went to jail, I thought that chapter of my life was over. The betrayal, the lies, the pain. I'd survived it all, and I was determined to move forward. I wasn't just healing from the emotional damage caused by his affair with my sister Lily. I was trying to reclaim my life. Every day was a battle, but I was starting to win. The months after the trial were a whirlwind. I sold the house we shared, moved into a smaller place downtown, and even got a new job, something that didn't remind me of everything I'd lost. I thought this would be my fresh start. I went to therapy religiously, journaled about my feelings, and focused on taking care of myself. For once, I was starting to feel free. That is, until the phone call came. I was sitting in my new apartment, enjoying a rare moment of peace, when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut told me to answer. Hello, is this Katie Sanders? A gruff voice asked. Yes, this is she, I replied, my heart already pounding. This is Officer Matthews with the local precinct. I'm calling to inform you that your ex-husband, Mark Sanders, has been released on bail. My stomach dropped. Bail? How? I stammered. He's supposed to be serving time for fraud and theft. There's been a delay in his sentencing due to some legal technicalities, Officer Matthews explained, clearly rehearsing what was probably a routine line for him. His attorney managed to get him released on bail pending appeal. We thought it necessary to inform you, given the circumstances. I barely heard the rest of what he said. My mind was spinning. Mark. Asterisk out asterisk. The man who had turned my life upside down was walking free again. "Thank you for letting me know," I mumbled, ending the call. The phone slipped from my hand onto the kitchen table, and I sat there for what felt like hours, processing. Days passed, and the anxiety I thought I had conquered came rushing back. I had no idea what Mark would do now that he was free. Knowing him, he wouldn't just let things lie. He was never one to take defeat gracefully, and he surely blamed me for his jail time. What was worse, I knew his hatred for me was rooted in his humiliation. Mark always had to be the one in control, and I had stripped that from him in the courtroom. I took every precaution I could think of. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and told my boss at work about the situation, just in case. I considered filing a restraining order, but something told me that it wouldn't stop him. Mark wasn't the type to follow rules if they didn't suit him. He was a manipulator, always had been. I should have known that the moment I caught him with Lily. In the meantime, I kept trying to live my life. I went to work, went to therapy, and tried not to look over my shoulder every 5 minutes. But the tension gnawed at me, like a predator lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, about a week after the call, it happened. It was a Friday evening. I had just finished a long day at work and was driving home, trying to unwind by listening to one of my favorite podcasts. I remember glancing at the rear-view mirror out of habit, and that's when I saw it. A car that had been following me for several blocks. At first, I brushed it off, thinking I was being paranoid. But when I made an unexpected turn down a side street and the car followed, my pulse quickened. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows as I navigated through the neighborhood, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. The car was still there, tailing me at a distance. My palms were slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. I made a sharp right into my driveway and parked, my heart pounding. The car slowed, then came to a stop right behind mine. I knew it before I even saw him step out. It was Mark. He slammed the car door, his eyes wild, his hair disheveled. This wasn't the smooth, calculated man I'd once married. This was a man pushed to the edge, his face twisted in fury and desperation. "Katie," he bellowed, his voice carrying down the quiet suburban street. "We need to talk." I stood frozen next to my car, one hand clutching my keys, the other trembling as I tried to dial 911 on my phone. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I hesitated, a part of me still in shock that he would show up like this. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. "You need to leave now. I'm calling the police." He sneered, taking slow, deliberate steps toward me. "The police? Again with the police? You've done enough, Katie. You already ruined my life. You think I'm just going to let you get away with it?" The audacity of his words stunned me. I had ruined his life. He had betrayed me, stolen from me, and tried to con my own sister. How twisted could someone be? "You did this to yourself, Mark," I snapped, my voice rising. "You made your choices, and now you're paying for them." His expression darkened, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man I used to know, the manipulator, the charmer turned predator. He lunged toward me, and I instinctively backed up toward my front door. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" Mark hissed, closing the gap between us. His breath reeked of alcohol, and the rage in his eyes was unnerving. "You think you can take everything from me and just move on? Well, guess what, Katie, I'm not done with you." He reached out, grabbing my arm. I struggled, trying to pull away, my mind racing with panic. I yelled for help, but the neighborhood was quiet, the sun dipping below the horizon. I kicked at him, desperate to break free, when a familiar voice rang out from behind him. "Let her go, Mark." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I recognized that voice, even though I hadn't heard it in months. It was Lily. Lily stood at the edge of the driveway, her eyes fixed on Mark. She looked different, her face paler, thinner, and her usual bravado replaced by something else, something like fear. But her voice was steady as she walked closer, standing between me and Mark. "What are you doing here?" Mark growled, his grip on my arm loosening slightly. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns me more than you think, Lily said, crossing her arms, her eyes never leaving his. I'm done playing your games, Mark. I stared at my sister, disbelief coursing through me. Lily, the woman who had betrayed me by having an affair with my husband, was now standing up for me? This had to be some sort of twisted joke. Lily, I said quietly, my voice shaking, what are you doing here? She glanced at me, her eyes filled with regret. I made a lot of mistakes, Katie, but I'm trying to fix at least one of them. She turned back to Mark, her face hardening. You think I don't know what you've been planning? Mark's face contorted in confusion and anger. What the hell are you talking about? Lily pulled out her phone, holding it up so Mark could see. I've been recording our conversations. Every phone call, every time you tried to manipulate me into helping you get more money from Katie. I've been talking to the police. I've got everything. For the first time, I saw real fear flicker across Mark's face. You're bluffing, he spat, his voice wavering. Lily shook her head. No, I'm not. The cops are already on their way. You think you can just get out on bail and come after Katie? You're going back to jail, Mark. Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. Mark's eyes darted between Lily and me, his chest heaving with anger and panic. He took a step back, then another, as if trying to calculate his next move. You're both going to regret this, he snarled, his voice low and venomous. But before he could do anything, the police arrived, lights flashing as officers stepped out of their cars, guns drawn. Mark was handcuffed and led away, screaming obscenities and threats the entire time. I stood there, numb, watching as the man who had once been my husband was shoved into the back of a police car for the second time. As the sirens faded into the distance, I turned to Lily. We stood in silence for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say. Finally, she broke the silence. I know you'll probably never forgive me, Katie, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I had to stop him. I had to at least try to make things right. I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. The wound she had caused was deep, but seeing her stand up to Mark like that, it was something I never expected. I don't know if I can forgive you, I admitted, but thank you for tonight. Lily nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I understand. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the driveway, the cool night air washing over me. A week later, I received a letter in the mail from my parents' attorney. Confused, I opened it to find a note explaining that my parents had left a small trust, one final inheritance intended to be split between me and Lily. It wasn't much, but the letter came with a message from my parents. No matter what happens, you two are family. This is our hope that you'll find your way back to each other. I sat there, holding the letter, tears streaming down my face. Maybe this was my parents' way of reminding us that no matter how broken things had become, there was still hope for healing. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for Lily and me to start over.